the truth about life. The preacher records or voices a truth about life that we all know. Life doesn't always work out the way we expect. Life isn't a straight line. It has twists and turns, especially the very last one that we all know well. Things happen to all of us, and we find ourselves needing help from others. But because of original sin, we're all fallen. Fallen in terms of morality, fallen in terms of integrity, fallen in terms of honesty, and we are left with nothing but broken dreams and broken hearts and fading vision. When we fall, when the unpredictable happens, we as God's children can be thankful that we have God's promises. And the one that I'm particularly thinking about today is from Hebrews chapter 4, verses 16 and 17. Hebrews 4, 15 and 16. For our high priest, that is, of course, Jesus, is able to understand our weaknesses. When he lived on earth, he was tempted in every way, like we are, but he did not sin. Let us then feel very sure that we can come before God's throne where there is grace. Then we can receive mercy and grace to help us when we need it. So Jesus, our high priest, understands what life is like. He doesn't leave us alone. He doesn't leave us to languish. When we fall, we're not forgotten. When we stumble, we're not abandoned. God is there. Okay, here's a quiz for all of us. I want to read some characteristics, and I want you to tell me, am I describing Jesus, or am I describing you, or am I describing both? Okay, here we go. Born to a mother. Is that only Jesus or us or both?
Both.
Of course. Of course. Born to a mother. Both. Yeah. Acquainted with physical pain.
Both, uncle.
Okay. Right. I'm going to go very fast and don't worry about replying. Okay. Enjoys a good party. Rejected by friends. Unfairly accused. Pays taxes. Turned off by greedy religion. Feels sorry for the lonely. Unappreciated by siblings. Stands up for the underdog. Kept awake at night by concerns and issues, known to doze off in the midst of trips, afraid of death. I can go on and on. But you, Jesus, or both? What's the answer? Both, of
Jesus.
course.
Both.
Yeah. It seems to me that you, I, and Jesus have a lot in common. Now, is that important? Yes, it is. It's important to understand that he understands everything, from small town anonymity to big town pressure. He walked the pastures of the sheep field. He also walked the royal flows of the king. He faced hunger. He's faced sorrow. He faced death. And he also wants us to know that he will face them with you and me. He understands, so we can come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. Then we will receive mercy and find help in time of need. The theology textbooks call this the incarnation. Incarnation simply means this: God became one of us. It's actually, when you think of it, an astounding thought. And the best summary passage of that promise is one we look at Christmas time. You know, the famous words that we read from John chapter 1, verse 14. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. So God came to us in the flesh, in the form of Jesus Christ. This is right at the heart of the Christian faith. God walked this earth. He was miraculously conceived. He was naturally delivered. He was born, but he was born of a virgin. Had Jesus simply descended to the earth in the form of a mighty being, we would respect him, but we would never draw near to him. After all, what could God understand what life is like for folks like us? On the other hand, if he had been biologically conceived with two earthly parents, we would sure draw near to him, but we would not want to worship him. Why not? Because he would be no different from us, no different than you or me. But if Jesus were both, at once God and man, then we'd have the best of both worlds. Neither his humanity or deity would be compromised, fully human, fully divine. Because of that, we draw near. Because of that, we worship him. Such is the message of Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 and 16. And I read that. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. Not one drop of divinity was lost in the change to humanity. The fullness of God, every bit of it, took its residence in the body of Jesus Christ. Jesus was born like all babies were born. His childhood was a common one. Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature. His body developed just like all our bodies developed. He was not spared the inconveniences of awkwardness, the awkwardness of adolescence, for example. Maybe he had pimples, the same challenges that any other teenager would have. We do know that he was weary enough to sit down at a well, and that's where he met the Samaritan woman. He was sleepy enough to fall asleep in a rocking boat. That's what surprised the disciples. He became hungry in the wilderness. He became thirsty on the cross. And when the soldiers pounded and nailed through his skin, 1,000 nerve endings cried out for relief. And as he hung on the cross, 2 human lungs cried out for oxygen. Yes, the Word became flesh. Now, does this matter? Yes, it does. If you ever wonder if God understands you, if you feel lonely and you wonder if God understands loneliness, if you find yourself dealing with discouragement, it's good to know that even Jesus, on one occasion, looked at the people around him and what did he say? How long must I put up with you? God is able to comprehend our weaknesses. We are often tempted to think, God. God lives in heaven, where all is sweetness and light. He doesn't have to undergo all that we have to today. And then when we pick up our Bibles and we begin reading the stories of how he became flesh, he was born not in a castle, but in a stable, how he was raised by not by angels, but by quarrelsome siblings and with a regular family. And he lived not in some hygienic bubble, but on a real earth with real dust and real storms and real stinkers in religion. And he put up with them all so that there would never, ever come a time that you or I or anybody could justifiably look up at heaven and say, it's a lot easier for you, God, up there than for me down here. Maybe that's why the Hebrew writer is so insistent that we get this straight. You know, Hebrews 4:15. Allow me to read to you from the J.B. Phillips translation. Hebrews 4:15 again. For we have no superhuman high priest to whom our weaknesses are unintelligible. He himself has shared fully in our experience of temptation, except that he never sinned. We can never say, God, you don't understand what I'm going through. Jesus himself, and not an angel, shared fully, not partially, in our experience, scripture says. If you have felt it, Jesus felt it. He felt every ache. He felt every type of stress without any exceptions, no substitutes. Why? So that he could sympathize with our weaknesses, so that knowing this, we can boldly approach the throne of grace. He experienced it all, except that he did not sin. Now, this has led some people to say that Jesus doesn't really understand temptation. Not so, not true. He understood it more than you or I do or will ever do. You know, he never sinned. You and I give in to temptation. Jesus felt it full force. Jesus was the only human being who has faced temptation right up to the extreme limit and never sinned. You know, you and I fall for our temptations. Maybe, let's say, if you were able to grade temptation, you know, A, B, C, D, etc. You and I fall at temptation B or C or D. Maybe some of us go to E, F, G, H or whatever. But Jesus has withstood it right up to temptation Z or Z. So don't think for a moment that he doesn't know how difficult life can be. And in the greatest deed of all, he who never sinned took on sin for you and for me, so that in him we might become what 2 Corinthians 5:21 says, that we might become the righteousness of God. In becoming sin, he felt all the consequences of sin. You know, right now, you are listening to me. I don't know what you are going through. I know that we're all going through the whole gamut of emotions, thoughts, all kinds of thoughts in our minds, all kinds of feelings, all kinds of emotions. And in becoming sin, Jesus felt all the consequences of sin, the loneliness that sin causes, the shame that sin causes, the despair, the fear that sin causes. Yes, And while hanging on the cross, he felt every element that sin would create, all the guilt, all the embarrassment, all the remorse. Jesus understands. Now, this means everything. What does this really mean? This means that when you bow your head today and you say, Lord, maybe someone here is saying, Lord, I'm sorry. It's been so long since I opened the Bible. It's been so long since I really prayed. And you know, when you say that, there's something in heaven that says, yes, yes, I know. I know the distractions. I know the temptations. I know the struggles. I know what you're going through. And this is what gave the writer to the Hebrews enough confidence to say, we can boldly approach the throne of grace, where we will find mercy to help us in our time of need. Allow me to close with this. At Billy Graham's funeral, I don't know how many of you watched that or saw that, all the children were given an opportunity to speak. One story that I'll never forget is the story told by Ruth, his daughter. Maybe you have heard it too. What's her story? This is what she said. After 21 years of marriage, she went through a divorce. Soon after that divorce, she met a widower and she became romantically involved with him. Her siblings urged her to be patient and not to move too quickly. Both her parents called and said, Ruth, take it slowly. Take it slowly. Don't rush. Wait on God. But she didn't listen. And on impulse, she married this man. And within 24 hours, she realized that she had made a mistake. Within 5 days, she said, we were separated. So she said, she called home. She said, Daddy, as she called her father, was at the house in North Carolina. I was a 2-day drive away, she said. And she told Daddy, what do I do? Well, he said, just come home. Come home. And she made that long drive from one coast all the way to the other. The Graham house in North Carolina has a long drive that winds its way to the main road. And she said, when she pulled off the main road onto the driveway, she saw her father. She saw that her father had already walked all the way down to the main road. And as she says it, these are her words. As I pulled in, I saw not Billy Graham, the world famous evangelist, but I saw Billy Graham, my father. And he was standing not with his arms folded, but with his arms outstretched. She said, I stepped out of the car and he held me close and let me cry. And these were her final words. She said, Billy Graham is not God, but on that day, he taught me how God behaves. Billy Graham is not God, but on that day, he taught me how God behaves. God the Father. I wonder if there is someone here today who needs to know that characteristic of God, that because he fully understands you and me, he is waiting with outstretched arms for you and me to come home. And when you come home, that's the kind of reception you will receive. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who was tempted like us in every way, yet he did not sin. Let us, therefore, boldly, with assurance, come before the throne of grace, where we shall find help when we need it. Your Father and my Father will help you to get home. That's his promise. That's his duty. That's what grace is. Why don't you rest in the almighty arms of your heavenly Father, the only one who understands what it's like and strong enough to carry you home? Amen.